Welcome, everybody, back to the Lust is Boring podcast. First off, if you want to join us in Italy in January, we want to welcome you onto a pilgrimage that Father Agostino Torres and I are going to be leading over there from Assisi down to Rome to the Colosseum, St. Peter's Basilica. If you've never been on one of our pilgrimages, they're a little bit out of the ordinary. In Jerusalem, we ended up going on a banana boat on the Sea of Galilee. A couple of pilgrims got involved in a sword fight in the basement of a Palestinian gift shop owner's store. It was a friendly sword fight, but we do things a little bit out of the box. So if you're in college, young adult, high school kid, want to come with your family, grandparents, everybody's welcome to go. So if you ever want to go over to Italy, just go to chastity.com/pilgrimage. Just click there. You'll get all the details. And again, that's going to be in January. And Father Agostino Torres, a Franciscan, is going to be our chaplain on the trip, taking us through Assisi in the footsteps of St. Francis there, St. Clare. So really looking forward to that. Consider, pray about joining us. Also, if you're a guy, it's not too late to sign up for St. Michael's Lent. If you're like me, you've never heard of this thing before a few weeks ago, but the good guys over at Exodus 90 have kind of unearthed this medieval tradition that St. Francis himself used to do. Just like Lent is a 40-day preparation leading up to Easter, St. Michael's Lent is 40 days leading up to the feast day of the archangels in late September. And so you can sign up for this as a guy. It involves some penance and sacrifice, fellowship, daily formation through an app. Just go to exodus90.com/Jason. Sign up for this thing. It's going to be an awesome experience. So make sure to do that as well. Now, today's guest, I came across an article that she had wrote called RedPill Dating, Content is Toxic. And her name is Jessica Kramer. She's an opinion writer, host of the radio show and podcast, The Based Catholic. After 5 years of working in politics and media out in Washington, D.C., she recently relocated back to Cleveland, Ohio. But Jessica, I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
I am so excited.
Yeah, no, it's a blessing to have you on. Now, these terms like red pill this, red pill that, could you give us a kind of a cursory overview? Like, some people are super familiar with this matrix terminology. Some people have kind of heard it, but aren't quite sure exactly what that means. What is red pill dating? Like, what is that even talking about?
So I have actually not seen The Matrix, so I'm not familiar with the terms, but I did look them up because they are internet slang. And I found out that red pill basically means you're kind of seeing things differently than how the world is presenting everything. So I think there's some truth in it, but I think because of a poor anthropology, they're missing a lot of what Catholics have. And I think that's the crucial thing that people need to take into account, is that some of them are making statements that are true, but not the full truth.
Now, what is toxic about it? Now, with The Matrix, I appreciate you haven't seen it. A lot of people watching might be fans of it, and I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but The Matrix, believe it or not, is a metaphor of transgenderism. This isn't some like right-wing conspiracy theory. The producer and director of the show were two brothers who were born male. They're biological males, but after the film was released, came out publicly transitioning to female, and they said the entire film actually is an allegory, a metaphor of transitioning your gender, where Neo is the person on this gender exploration. The red pill technically is cross-sex hormones. And I'm not just coming up with this on my own. There's a woman named Helen Joyce wrote a book called Trans, if you want to read about it. She shares firsthand experience where the producer, the director explain this is why that whole movie was written. And so if you're a Matrix fan, sorry to burst your bubble, but that's what that whole thing is about. But in terms of transitioning to the dating topic, you had mentioned that red pill dating is toxic. What's toxic about it?
Well, I think what is toxic is, so basically I'm talking in terms of this girl, Pearl Davis, Andrew Tate, and the Whatever podcast. So that's kind of what I'm seeing generated on Instagram Reels. And if you're looking through certain things about dating, you'll catch this in your algorithm. So I'm talking about these specifically. I probably don't know all of the ones that are out there on the internet. But in terms of these platforms that I've been seeing, I think what's toxic about it is that it's kind of fueling the war between the genders. So you'll watch it and you end up getting kind of fired up, and it kind of is offensive. And you walk away, I think, having more animosity towards the opposite sex than I think any healing is going on. And so I think if you're not building a bridge for women and men to understand each other, I think you're actually doing more harm to the dating sphere than any help.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go through the names you kind of threw out there, from the Wetter podcast to Andrew Tate. Let's start with Mr. Tate. I've heard feedback, initially super misogynistic, all that, and then he went to jail for, I guess, 2 years or something over in, was it Romania or Hungary or somewhere over there, and then he's come out kind of a different person. I don't know, like, I've spent less than 5 minutes of my entire life watching any of his content, so I'm not the most objective of sorts, but I know a lot of men, young men in particular, single young men, have been very brought in to the culture of Andrew Tate. And I think usually when that happens, the person's kind of touching a nerve of something that's really a legitimate need, and sometimes going overboard in terms of the overcorrection, in terms of the remedy being offered. But because the problem is so severe, the overcorrection almost seems like, okay, this is the solution to it. And a lot of guys dive head in. So give me your take on Andrew Tate and where you think he fits in, friend or foe to the whole dating movement.
Oh, I think he's a total foe. I mean, honestly, as a woman, I do not get the appeal of him whatsoever. I don't think he's charming. I don't think he's, even attractive. I think he's very aggressive. So I don't know if that appeals to men in particular, but I know it doesn't appeal to women that I know or myself. I think with him, it's really sad because I think he's a son who was raised by a single mother and he didn't have a father figure. And I don't know if he's trying to lean in and kind of be that for other men, but I think the saddest part about all of this is that you have a generation of men who are looking to the internet to fill these father wounds because they don't have men in their life. They don't have fathers or uncles or brothers or coaches or priests that are looking after them and kind of teaching them how to be a man. So I think the most toxic aspect of this is that there's such a disconnect between real men and men's lives and somebody that can get a million, tons of millions of clicks from men that are obviously seeking some sort of way out of the current situation. But like you said, I think it's an overcorrection. I think this is a response to feminism, and I think it's rooted in a lot of hatred towards women. And so I think that's where I'm really turned off by a lot of what he says, because I don't think it's out of love for women, and I don't think it's really out of love for men to heal the wounds with women in their life. So I think that is my biggest issue with him.
Now, I've heard, I don't know if this is true, not only that he's married, but apparently that he's married to multiple women.
I wasn't even aware that he was married. I just knew that he had baby mamas that he was financially supporting.
Yeah. So what is his message to guys regarding women? Are they seen as just things to be used and discarded? Is it seen as like, hey, women have taken too much control of the dating scene and we need to get that back? What is it you think that's so appealing to guys in the message of what he's saying about women?
Honestly, I don't know, because on one hand, he's talking about personal responsibility and supporting your children and supporting these women that are having his children, but he's not willing to commit to one woman. And then on the other hand, you see his brother releasing videos of how to deflower virgins, that he does, multiple virgins a year. And he's teaching men how to, basically get women and be promiscuous, and that, sex is their domain, and that, and then on the flip side, he's telling women basically don't be sleeping around. But I'm really confused because his whole lifestyle is about sleeping around. So I don't exactly know what women he wants to sleep with if he's telling all the women not to sleep around, but he's not telling men that. And I think that's the biggest issue, is that there's a total missing link, and there's that sexual double standard that I think for a lot of women, their knee-jerk reaction is like, no, like, if you're not going to do this, why should I? And so I think, again, it's like he's not reflecting on himself and seeing where he himself or other men could better themselves to fix the situation. I think he, again, is just blaming women. And I think, unfortunately, I have a feeling that he's probably been hurt in the past, and that this is all kind of a domino effect from that.
Yeah, it sounds from your take on him that he's definitely living, I'd say, out of those wounds, because it's really interesting. If you're essentially saying, I want all the men in the world to listen to me, but none of the women in the world to listen to me, it's like, okay, we've got a problem here. That this idea of I just love so many women, I just can't pick one. It reminds me of a guy that was on the Whatever podcast, on that episode that Lila Rose did with him. I think the guy's name was Justin. And, and he was talking about how he's got all these female partners and all these kids, and he takes care of all of them. He said, look, I don't care if I'm a father to 100 kids, I can do that. And, when I heard that, it was just like, wait a minute, like having 100 kids, at that point, you're not a father, you're a sperm donor. There's a very big difference, because from a child's perspective, what I've noticed in raising boys and girls, I've noticed as a father, they're always asking, Daddy, did you see what I did? Watch me hit this ball. Watch me throw this rock. Watch me do that thing, Daddy. We're in the backyard practicing a lot of archery lately, and they're like, Daddy, watch this shot. Daddy, look at where I hit the target. It's really something where there's a craving of a kid to be seen and affirmed by their own father. And so if you've got a kid and he hits a home run in that little league game, he's going to be rounding the bases, and you can be sure he's looking into the stands. I want to meet my father's eyes. I want to see that he saw what I did. Or some 12-year-old girl going to bed at night. She wants to have her dad look at her when she's had a hard day at school and her friends don't want to be her friend anymore. And she's wondering, what's wrong with me that I'm not popular anymore? They want to see themselves in your eyes. And how on earth could you possibly do that when you've got 15 female partners and all these kids that you're basically paying child support out on? And they act like they're giving themselves all these women. They're not giving themselves to anybody. It's like if I had a gift card at your favorite coffee shop and I'm like, hey, here's this gift card. And then 5 minutes later, I take it from you and I give it to this other woman. Here's a gift card. Here's a gift card. And I gave it to like 15 people, but like nobody has it. It's like you didn't give anything because you won't let go. And so I think a lot of guys like this public image of this generosity of their affections, but in reality, they're incredibly stingy because they want to pretend to give when all that they're really doing is taking.
Yes. And also, Andrew Tate didn't grow up with a father. Like that's always the thing that I found most interesting is you would think that you would want to be the father that you didn't have. And instead he's just generationally keeping up that cycle that you talk about a lot. Yeah,
there was the line you said in the blog that you wrote that I wrote down. You said, these men can't handle seeing women mirror their own behavior. As like zing, I think that's what's going on. Is like he doesn't want to see any woman live like he does, and you see this prevalent on the Whatever podcast where there's
oh my gosh, it's the worst.
Where's the shaming of that lifestyle where guys get a pass in a sense.
Yes.
I know some people listening may be familiar with the Whatever. Tell us a little bit about that, like what you're seeing on the Whatever podcast, and what is this new phenomenon?
Oh my gosh. Well, I wrote about this because I was just so creeped out by it because you have probably a futuristic sex doll sitting there with aqua hair or just on the panel. You've got these guys taking notes and asking sexually specific follow-up questions to these girls that they invite on that they meet online, who are typically girls with OnlyFans accounts. And they end up spending the whole episode. I don't know if they think that they're doing a service to the culture. They're basically shaming these women the entire episode. But yet I think what I've noticed is their biggest the point that they're always trying to make to these women, because the women naturally are like, well, you're criticizing me for sleeping around, but yet you think it's okay. This is their defense every single time. They're saying it's so much harder for guys to get girls than it is for girls to get guys. And I'm like, how is that a defense for sleeping around? Because actually I would look at it and I'd be like, but do you know how high value of a man you would be if you were actually saying no to all these girls that think you're attractive, all these girls that obviously would get with you? I mean, you would actually be more high value if you turned them down. So it's weird to me to think that because, it's a little bit more challenging for you to sleep with somebody, therefore that gives you a pass to sleep with them. I don't understand that logic. And that's usually their defense towards these women. And you see this exchange and the girls are just very, very confused.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them because it's a very confusing defense. I don't really know how they see that. And then, it's weird because you've got one guy on there that is, I guess going through a conversion. He says that he's saving sex for marriage now. But some of the things that he says, make me question that conversion and the sincerity of it. And so you end up not having really great defenses of the other side. And I don't really know if it's helping our culture because I think, they'll spend 4 hours on this podcast and I don't see a lot of positive interaction coming out. So I end up kind of looking at it as this is noise, this is distraction. The thumbnails are very, porny graphics that are trying to get, guys angry at women to click. And so to me, it just seems like a spectacle and I don't think it's very helpful.
Yeah, it's kind of like that phrase in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. And so what they want to do is just show bleeding relationships and just the brokenness between the sexes without having a remedy by the end of the show. But I think the barometer that you kind of said at the beginning of the show is like, where does this leave you afterwards in your spirit? could you possibly watch 4 hours of women being slut shamed and feel good about anything afterwards? I mean, if anything, it would just kind of lead to this sense of just despair and hopelessness in relationships. Because, I mean, for me, I don't know, my mind, it just kind of fogs at this idea of, okay, it's easier for a woman to get a man than it is for a man to get a woman. Therefore, men can use women, but women shouldn't. It's like, I don't understand how there's any logical connection there. Maybe it's like, well, why is it so hard for you to get a woman in the first place? Maybe it could have something to do with your attitude towards women. And these women that are quote unquote getting these men, are they really getting the men? No, they're just getting used by the men. That's very different than getting a man. Because, sometimes when I talk to high school, college girls about, hookup kind of culture, I use an analogy that C.S. Lewis talked about cigarettes, that C.S. Lewis said that we use a most unfortunate idiom when we say of a lustful man prowling the streets that he wants a woman. C.S. Lewis says a woman is precisely what he does not want. He wants a pleasure for which the woman happens to be the necessary piece of apparatus. And his desire for her can be gauged by his attitude towards her 5 minutes after fruition, for one does not keep the carton after one has smoked the cigarettes. And then he says, but true desire makes a man not desire women in general, but one particular woman. And it's an indisputable fashion. He desires the beloved, not the pleasure that she can give. And so I think in light of that quote, these girls that are showing up from OnlyFans onto this podcast, they're probably arguing for something they don't even want in the first place. Like they're grasping on to something they don't even desire and calling it liberation, because what they want is just to be wanted. And just for a minute, when those guys click on them or hit on them or whatever, I mean, yeah, you feel wanted, but it's wanted as a commodity, not as a person. You want it as a means to fulfill my pleasure rather than actually desire you as a person. So I think it's false that it's easier for a woman to get a man.
I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just easier for her to get used by a man. I think a lot of guys would like to get used by a girl, but the girls aren't interested in that. And so it's like, oh, well, you have it easier. It's like, well, no, let's turn the tables. Maybe in a sense, the girls have it harder in a sense, that what they really ache for. Yeah, maybe she's not doing the best job advertising that she wants that kind of love. I mean, obviously, if she's got an OnlyFans page and all that stuff, it's like heartily screaming, hey, give me unconditional love. But I think you've got to look beyond the superficial expression to like, what is it that girl really wants? Trust me, it's not at the end of the day the dollar bills. It's to actually be cherished, but she probably has reached a point of despair in her life that she isn't even worth cherishing. So she'll settle with just being used.
Yeah, and I don't think that the guys on this podcast know that women know the difference between being seen and being looked at. And and that's the thing, it's not actually a compliment to have guys hit on you when you know what they're after.
Yeah.
You know the difference. And I don't think that they know that we know that. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it's so true. There's talk on the internet of femcells. So this would be female incels, not women that can't obtain sex, but women that can't obtain intimacy.
Wow.
Which is what they're craving and what men are not able to offer these days.
Oh, that's a really interesting. I have not heard that one, femcells, because our listeners may be familiar with incels, which is a term applying to guys that are involuntary celibates of like, hey, I want this, but I just can't find it. But that's interesting. The flip side of that is the women aching for intimacy and being unable to find it. You mentioned there that wanting to be seen and not just looked at. I think of I was at a friend's wedding, and there was the wedding song between the bride and the groom was from the country music star Gabby Barrett, called "The Good Ones." And there's a line in there where it's a great song, but there's a line in there where she says, "You'll know him when you see him by the way he looks at me." And it's like, whoa, she's not just saying he looks at me like these googly eyes, but like you'll know he's the guy by this penetrating gaze of reverence he has towards you. Women long to not just be seen, to be looked at as collection of body parts, but actually to be seen. And, I think what they're settling for is just being looked at. When I think if you were just be able to sit with these girls at this whatever podcast and really ask them, well, what is it you really ache for at the end of the day? Is it to put your head on the pillow at night and be like, hey, I got 10,000 new followers, or I got all this new money from people clicking on my videos? Like, was it really that fulfilling a day? And so I think what we got to do is kind of tap into that deeper ache that these girls really what they want, because obviously they're not going to find it in the means that they're trying right now.
Yeah. And same thing for the guys. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to ask them what they really want because I
Yeah.
don't even know if they've answered it on that podcast.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of the pendulum swinging, I think we also have another extreme, the Pearl Davis kind of thing, the pick-me girl type.
Yes.
Could you speak as to what that is? Because people, I think a lot of have heard these terms, whether it's Andrew Tate, whatever podcast, RedPill, pick-me type. But it's kind of like keeping up with my teenagers' lingo. Like sometimes I tease my kids of trying to say things like, oh, that's gas. Oh, that's lit. That's fire. No cap. You know, all these things. My dad, stop it. That's not how you use gas. But can you explain what is this pick me type? What does that mean?
So here's the thing. I am not actually a huge person on internet lingo, but I will say this. So the pick me girl is basically what it sounds like. It's a girl that's going in front of guys being like, pick me. And I think so many women are afraid of being accused as feminists that they're swinging, like you said, in the opposite end of the pendulum to the extreme, where they're like the most anti-feminist, where they're now blaming women themselves for what's happened with the sexual revolution and what's happened with feminism. And so I actually think you're seeing some self-loathing. And I don't know if it's people that haven't forgiven themselves and they're experiencing a lot of guilt, or if it's for clicks and to have a platform to kind of make a name for yourself and have this type of career. It's interesting. It's like Pearl Davis constantly talks about how women shouldn't work. And I have some friends that are some pretty good trolls online, and they'll tweet at her like, well, aren't you making an entire job and career out of telling women not to work?
Yeah.
Or she'll say like, women shouldn't talk, and then they'll just troll her and be like, well, why are you talking? Like they'll kind of throw her philosophy back at her because it doesn't make sense. But you're kind of seeing this place where women are thinking that they're inherently inferior than men. And it's not just being inferior in a particular job, or maybe there's a sexual difference between the sexes, but like actually inferior. So again, it's a bad anthropology that doesn't understand men and women from the Catholic perspective. And I think she might have been raised Catholic. I don't know, obviously, where she stands in terms of the faith. She's kind of grifting to Islam. I think a lot of this is trending because of Andrew Tate and his conversion to Islam. So unfortunately, I think a lot of these people are thinking that Christians are weak, Christians are all fluff, and they think that they need to go to the more extreme religion, which on one hand, I will say there is a lot of that in Christianity. But I don't think, again, like you said in the podcast for my show, they're not getting the real thing. And so I think when you're not tasting true Catholicism and you're getting that watered down, maybe like suburban, corny Catholicism that I think a lot of people in my generation experienced, if you start to have this type of conversion where you're just so against the culture, you're going to be drawn to that.
Yeah.
But it's the wrong thing.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to spit out lukewarm Catholicism. I mean, God himself does. And I was talking to some of the pilgrims over at World Youth Day from Ireland, talking about what's going on in the church over there, where basically the whole faith has been pretty much just abandoned for the most part. It's kind of an underground church going on right now. And I said, my take on what's happened with Irish Catholicism is, in a sense, they were kind of force-fed kind of this lukewarm, either this fluff lukewarm Catholicism or just rigid rules. And when you're being force-fed something, especially if it's lukewarm, your natural reaction is just to spit it out. Like, don't shove that down my throat. And then it can lead to a point of resentment where you're throwing your food at the chef. Like I don't even want this stuff. And I think that's what's going on right now, is they're just taking this food that was this lukewarm Christianity, Catholicism that was force-fed to them, throwing it at the chef. And I think there's an understandable reaction to that. But the next step is they're going to realize, I'm kind of hungry. Like, I could go for some food. And so I think spiritually, when you throw it all away, the baby with the bathwater, you're left with this ache. And I can totally understand why people would go to like a more almost militant, structured, demanding religion if all they got was like cotton candy Catholicism in the cafeteria. It's like, well, yeah, who's going to be a martyr for that kind of thing? But I think those people were,
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just thinking also, it's very structured, it's very militaristic, but it also doesn't require you to kill your lust. You know, in Islam, you can have multiple women as your wives. You know, you can men kind of run the society. They don't have to hold women with that kind of reverence. So it doesn't force you to convert, but it allows you to kind of have that outlet where you can be, you can think of yourself as a religious, devoted person in your culture.
No, I've heard this saying that said, men, we all want to look like a knight, but we don't want to bleed like one. And I think with Islam, one of the things that distinguishes it, I think, from Christianity is a lot of Islam, the jihad is an exterior holy war that you're engaging in. So it's tapping into that desire for something militant. But with Christianity, it's more of an interior holy war. And I think that's one of the benefits, so to speak, of going to Islam is like I can engage in this exterior holy war without interiorly slaying my own demons of selfishness and lust and pride. So if you've got some guy with multiple sexual partners, thinking that he's somehow conquering the world, when in reality, the only thing that's happened, he's been conquered by his own lust.
Yeah, now, absolutely.
Now, how does this play in, would you say, to the fact that this is the first time in the history of American civilization that the majority of Americans are not married? This has never been seen before, where most Americans are single and they're not in any rush to run to the altar. What do you think is fueling that? Is it fear? Is it disillusionment? Is it seeing their parents' own messed up marriages? Is it the desire just to cohabit instead and see what happens? What would you say is the reason why the marriage rates continue to decline?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wrote about this for Crisis 2 years ago in a piece that I wrote, The Political Path Forward, Get Married and Have Kids. And I just look at my generation, they grew up really with no faith. They were told that sex was casual recreation. They're all about achieving, their own pleasure. They worship at the altar of their own orgasm. They have seen marriage dissipate because of their parents being divorced. They see kids as a burden or an accessory to your career. If you look at our culture and our society, there is no reverence for marriage. You can live with each other for years. We have a materialistic culture that just wants, big houses and fancy vacations and nice new cars. Yeah. There's really no call to give of yourself to anybody or to even leave a legacy and have kids. So I think, it's unfortunate for Catholics and Christians who really desire that. And there's just such a small number of, fellow young people in the church. And so I think what you're seeing is just our culture has overtaken our generation. And I really don't, it kind of, in some ways, it feels really, really desperate. I don't want to get nihilistic and think it's the end of the world, but I don't know what it's going to take for that turn to happen. And it's interesting because I don't know if it needs to be, a conversion on love to reignite the faith, or if it's going to have to be, a conversion of the faith to reignite a culture of love. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've seen that translate into marriage. As you look on social media, you got new terms like DINK coming out, which is double income, no kids, where people are showing off their Instagram reels with their wife. They've been married for 9 years. They haven't had any kids. And it's like, man, we got 2 incomes, no kids. And now we're in Capri, and now we're in Naples, and now we're in Bora Bora, and here and there. Yeah. All these just amazing, great Instagram photos. But I look at that and I see absolute poverty. I see somebody who maybe the day is going to come okay, well, let's settle down and have kids, taking their own fertility for granted, thinking it's just going to be there when they want it. And then they're 45, 50, 60 years old. And it's like, why don't we have grandkids? Well, it's probably because we never had kids. What do we have? Yeah. We've got a bunch of photos stored up on a hard drive of a vacation, an extended 10-year honeymoon that we wanted because we didn't want to give of ourselves to somebody else. And it's, it's a sad thing because I know, for my life, greatest joy in my life is my kids. Nothing even remotely approaches the joy that they bring. And so this idea that don't get a wife, she's a ball and chain, don't get a kids, it's going to be game over. It's this is from the pits of hell. And so I think what you started us off with is kind of the best way to measure where are these people at? What is it doing in your spirit? When you're done listening to what Andrew Tate has to say, the Whatever podcast people, like I said, I haven't watched much of this stuff at all. But yeah, look at where your spirit's at afterwards. And if it's left in an accusatory state of just I'm kind of angry at girls, I'm kind of angry at guys. Yeah, this is unfair. And it kind of gets you fires up and angry and you start to lose your peace over it. Maybe it's time to shut that stuff down. Maybe it's time to pick up a good holy book, a book on dating, relationships, sexuality that's going to give you hope instead of give you despair, or read some of your blogs. And so I don't know if you had any final thoughts or where people could go to go read your stuff.
Oh, yeah. So I wrote that article for The American Mind. So it's on theamericanmind.com. You can follow me on Twitter. My Instagram will be public shortly. And you can follow my podcast on Apple or Spotify and subscribe. And I also have a YouTube channel that I'm uploading the podcast. I'm in the process of uploading that there as well.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Based Catholic, your podcast, what that is?
Yeah, so I've been trying to do a radio show for a while now. And basically the gist of it is that it's not a purely Catholic podcast that's about Catholicism. I argue that every podcast or radio show is religious because every person is. Everyone has a worldview that they base everything upon. And so we're looking at everything in politics and culture and religion and looking at it through a perspective that is rooted on Catholicism. So it is Catholic, but it is not purely everything Catholic all the time.
Gotcha. So what I'll do is I'll put in the show notes the link to the article that we discussed today, your podcast, and your social media handles so people can connect with you, the good work that you're doing. So Jessica, thank you for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it. And before we wrap up, I also want to thank all the patrons that are supporting us here at Lust is Boring. If you want to join our Patreon community to help us to grow the mission of spreading this message, just go to patreon.com/Jason Everett, and you can get all kinds of free swag depending on the level of giving. I'll give you a personal phone call so we can talk and hang out. Give you my email if you got any questions. You can shoot them to me that way. Just go to patreon.com/Jason Everett. But again, Jessica, thank you for coming on the show. Keep up the awesome work.
Thank you so much for having me.